Imagine the cold. It is a wet, creeping cold that gets under your heavy iron armor and settles permanently into your bones. You are standing in the peat bogs of Caledonia, near the absolute edge of the known world. The year is 108 AD. The mist rolling off the hills is a physical wall. You can barely see the man standing next to you, let alone the tree line 50 paces away. You are a legionary of Legio IX Hispana, the 9th Spanish Legion. You are part of a war machine that has crushed kings, enslaved entire nations, and redrawn the map of the earth in blood. You are 5,000 men strong, moving as a single, devastating organism. Your armor is interlocking steel. Your discipline is absolute. You do not feel fear. You are the sledgehammer of the emperor. But right now, in the silence of the Scottish Highlands, something is deeply wrong. The birds have stopped singing. The wind has died. The only sound is the rhythmic, heavy crunch of iron hobnailed boots, your caligae, sinking into the freezing mud. Then the fog breaks, a war horn screams. It is not the clean, brass note of a Roman cornu. It is a ragged, terrifying shriek of animal bone and bronze. Thousands of painted warriors pour out of the mist. They do not fight in ordered lines. They fight like a force of nature, swinging heavy iron broadswords that shatter wooden shields and crush bronze helmets. The Roman formation, the legendary impenetrable shield wall known as the testudo, is designed for open fields and logical warfare. Here, in the claustrophobic mud and tangled roots, it is a death trap. Within hours, the sledgehammer is broken. 5,000 men are slaughtered in the dirt. The sacred bronze eagle, the aquila, the literal soul of the legion, is dragged away into the dark woods. It is a staggering military defeat. But what happens next is what makes this story truly terrifying. When the news finally reaches Rome, the emperor does not send a rescue mission. He does not order a public day of mourning. Instead, he issues a silent administrative execution order against the memory of the 9th Legion itself. They are going to be erased, not just from the battlefield, but from human history. In the ancient world, losing an army was a disaster, but losing in a way that shattered the illusion of Roman invincibility meant your very existence was a threat to the state. To understand the sheer scale of this cover-up, you have to understand what a Roman legion actually was. It was not just a battalion of troops you could simply replace. A legion was a mobile city. It was an economic engine. It was the physical embodiment of the emperor's divine will. For over a century, the 9th had been stationed at Eboracum, the massive stone fortress we now call York. They built roads, they collected taxes, they married local women and raised families in the civilian settlements just outside the fortress walls. They were the economic and political center of gravity for all of northern Britannia. Under legendary commanders like Quintus Petilius Cerealis, they had a reputation for ruthless efficiency. They were the men who held the line against the dark. For an entire legion to simply vanish was physically and economically impossible. Yet, if you look at the official Roman military rosters after the year 120 AD, there is a gaping hole. Legio Sic Victrix is there. Legio Valeria Victrix is there. But Legio IX is gone completely. How do you memory hole 5,000 people? The Romans had a specific legal tool for this. It was called Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Usually, this was a political weapon used against disgraced emperors or traitors as senators. It meant your statues were smashed, your face was scratched off gold coins, your name was chiseled out of public monuments. It was the ancient equivalent of being deleted from the historical hard drive. Applying Damnatio Memoriae to an entire military institution is an act of sheer bureaucratic terror. Imagine the scene across the empire. Government stonemasons are dispatched to public squares, temples, and aqueducts from Britain to Italy. They carry heavy iron chisels and hammers. They approach massive granite dedication stones, find the letters Legio IX Hisp, and physically gouge them out. We have found these stones. Today, in museums across Europe, you can look at Roman altars where the name of the 9th Legion has been violently scraped away. It leaves a haunting, empty scar in the rock. The silence is deafening, but you cannot just scrape a name off a rock. You have to silence the survivors. Back in York, widows suddenly stop receiving their military pensions. When they approach the provincial governor's office to ask why, they are met with blank stares. The clerks look them dead in the eye and pretend they do not know what legion they are talking about. Surviving veterans, men who perhaps were sick in the hospital wing or left behind on garrison duty during the massacre, are quietly folded into other units. They are sworn to absolute secrecy under threat of crucifixion. The administrative records are burned. The official tax registries are meticulously rewritten. Within a single generation, it is as if they never existed. Why would Rome go to such extreme lengths? Why not just admit defeat, raise a new army, and take brutal revenge? Because Rome's greatest weapon was never its army. It was its psychology. Rome ruled through the myth of inevitability. When the Roman machine marched on your borders, you knew you might win a skirmish. You might even win a battle, but you could never win the war. Rome would simply raise another legion and another until your cities were nothing but ash. They were a crushing, unstoppable glacier of iron and paperwork. But if word spread that a coalition of unarmored, barefoot tribesmen in the northern bogs had completely annihilated the legendary 9th Legion, that myth would shatter. The emperor at the time was Hadrian. He was a brilliant, pragmatic ruler. He looked at the map of the known world and realized the empire had overextended itself. It was bleeding money and men. He wanted to build a massive stone wall across Britannia to seal off the untamable north forever. We call it Hadrian's Wall. But you cannot build a massive 70-mile engineering project if the tribes to the south are in open revolt. If the Brigantes tribe sitting right below the proposed wall realized that Rome could bleed, they would rise up instantly. The entire province would burn. Hadrian made a cold, calculated geopolitical choice. The lives of 5,000 men and the grief of their families were a small price to pay to maintain the illusion of absolute power. For almost 2,000 years, the cover-up actually worked. Historians in the 19th and 20th centuries looked at the missing records and assumed the 9th Legion simply moved somewhere else. Maybe they were transferred to the Middle East and wiped out decades later in the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea. Maybe they were disbanded for cowardice. The Roman state had successfully blinded the future. They had erased the truth so thoroughly that modern scholars believed the lie. But the earth remembers what bureaucrats try to forget. Our first real clue came from the mud of a place called Vindolanda. This was a Roman auxiliary fort near the Scottish border. In the 1970s, archaeologists digging in the deep, waterlogged soil found something impossible. Wafer-thin slices of wood covered in ink. They were letters. These are the Vindolanda tablets. They are the mundane, everyday thoughts of the soldiers stationed at the edge of the world. When you read them, you hear the voices of ghosts. A soldier writes home asking for warmer socks and more underwear. An officer complains about the terrible quality of the local beer. A commander's wife invites her friend to a birthday party. It is deeply human and deeply unsettling, because as you read the letters dated closer to the year 108 AD, the tone shifts. The mundane complaints vanish. A creeping terror begins to bleed into the ink. The officers write about the local tribes with a mix of disgust and fear. They call them Britunculi, the nasty little Britons. They note that the enemy does not fight in standard formations. They use the terrain, they ambush, they vanish into the mist. The letters paint a picture of a frontier on the verge of a violent, chaotic collapse. The Roman soldiers knew something terrible was coming in the dark. They were right. But letters only tell us there was fear. They do not tell us how the 9th Legion died. Then came the physical proof. Deep in hostile territory, far north of York, a modern metal detectorist scanning a lonely field found a piece of rusted silver. It was a phalaria. This is a highly prestigious military decoration, usually worn on the leather chest harness of a senior officer during parades. On the back, etched sharply into the silver, was the name of the 9th Legion. This medallion was not dropped casually on a peaceful marching route. It was found buried under a layer of burning ash, in the middle of a desolate landscape, surrounded by the physical debris of a brutal, undocumented skirmish. It is a piece of shrapnel from a massacre the government said never happened. Think about what that silver medallion means. An aquilifer, an eagle-bearer, or a senior centurion of the 9th died in the freezing mud of Scotland, clutching his highest honor. He died believing that his emperor would avenge him. He died believing his name and the name of his brothers would be recorded in the eternal glorious rolls of Rome. Instead, the empire he bled for took a chisel to his memory. The erasure of the 9th Legion is not just a piece of ancient military trivia. It is a terrifying blueprint for how authority controls reality. Before the invention of the internet, before mass media, A centralized power managed to delete 5,000 human beings from existence just to protect a political narrative. They weaponized silence. This is not a failure of logistics. This is not a loss of territory. This is the calculated shattering of reality. When we look back at history, we naturally assume we are seeing the truth. We assume the records we read are an accurate reflection of what happened. But history is rarely a mirror. It is a filter. It is just the story the survivors decided not to burn. The silence surrounding the Ninth Legion screams at us from across 2 millennia. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. If a government can successfully memory hole 5,000 of its most loyal soldiers just to save face, what makes you think the history you read today hasn't been carefully, surgically scraped clean? Every time you walk past a public monument, every time you read an official government report, you have to wonder, what names have been chiseled out of the stone? What uncomfortable truths have been quietly relocated to the ash heap of history? We trust the archive because it is neatly organized. But the archive is curated by the victor, and the victor's first priority is never the truth. It is survival. As we close the file on the Ghost Legion of Britannia, the mist rolling back over the freezing Scottish bogs, there are 3 truths you have to take away from this massacre. First, invincibility is always a fragile illusion. The greatest military machine of the ancient world was not broken by superior technology or brilliant generalship. It was broken by terrain, chaos, and desperate men fighting for their homes in the shadows. Second, the administrative murder of a memory is often more permanent and far more cruel than a physical death. A sword can end a soldier's life in an instant, but a bureaucrat with a chisel can erase his entire existence from the future forever. Third, and this is the one that should keep you awake tonight. Those 5,000 men died for a state that viewed their memory as a political liability. They were loyal to the absolute bitter end, and their reward was Damnatio Memoriae. Tell me down in the comments, if a nation is willing to completely erase its most fiercely loyal defenders just to maintain an illusion of control, what modern historical event do you think has been quietly erased with a bureaucratic chisel?